Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Olivia Stier, who will be giving a presentation here momentarily. And before that, I just want to give a little bit of a bio or background about Olivia. Olivia was born and raised here in Kalamazoo, earning a BFA in photography from the Gwen Frostic School of Art at Western Michigan University. Currently, she is an artist in residence at the Kirknaman Art School here at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. And she considers herself a multidisciplinary artist who uses primary photography as the vehicle for her work. Through this process, she explores themes of grief, memory, and the ineffable qualities in between. I hope you give a warm welcome to Olivia.
Hi, everyone. Leslie, thank you for the intro. And thanks, everyone, for being here. My name is Olivia Stier. I was born and raised here in Kalamazoo, where I spent most of my life. Besides a few years, I lived in Grand Rapids, and then a few years I lived outside of Seattle, Washington. The Great Lakes region has always felt like home to me. I feel immensely inspired by the landscapes, the comforts of home, and the time that I've spent here. I sometimes find it difficult to talk about myself and even more difficult to talk about my artistic practice because it feels like something that is so hard to quantify, especially with just how precious it is. Like I can't always find the words, and yet other times it feels really effortless. So here's my attempt. An artistic practice is really sacred. It's something you have to constantly nourish, much like yourself. I've learned so much about practice over the years, and the biggest thing is that you have to practice practicing. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes showing up and telling on yourself and putting in the time and energy. And above all else, it takes the want to hold that practice in your hands and care for it so deeply. I think for so many of us, we make art because we have to. We have no other choice. And not in a way that feels forceful or unpleasant, but in a way that just makes sense. I make art because what else would I do with all my feelings? What else would I do with my imagination? I've been a very curious person all my life. My parents would often say that all I ever did was ask why to every single thing around me until that became really exhausted. If you spend time with me, you'll learn very quickly that I love street debris, dead animals, disassembled food, trash, strange happenings, weird building patterns, flowers, shadows. I document what I see constantly. The strange and discarded parts of life are what inspire me the most. And I'm often asked where I find inspiration, so I created a list to read off. I find it while riding my bike, when swimming in the lake, when my hands are in the garden. I find it in the cemetery behind my house, in the cicadas in late August, and in the sounds of spring. I find it while sitting on my friend's porch at sunset, when the leaves fall, in the shadows, and in the liminal spaces. I find it in the early mornings and late nights. I'm an incredibly nostalgic person, and it's mostly because I'm deeply inspired by memory and the way that it attaches to space. Memory feels very safe to me, like a place to be and a place to go. It's always felt like something that is constantly becoming over and over and over again. But my biggest inspiration is grief. I feel like to some degree I've always been grieving. I was born into it. It felt like for so long it was all I knew. Losing family members, friends, community members, neighbors. I think when you know grief so well, it feels like it colors everything in your life. And for so long, I didn't really know what to do with that grief, so now I let it take a different shape. A lot of the work I make recently comes as a direct response to working through the grief of losing my dad. He's in the middle. And here's some pictures of us when I was a baby. When I was 20 years old, I was attending Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids when my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. I still remember the day I got the call. I walked for miles and miles and miles because I knew if I stopped moving, reality would set in and I would have to face it, and I was not ready to do that. Only 5 months from the diagnosis, my dad died, and everything changed so rapidly. I was really angry and bitter and confused, but mostly angry. And so I left. I dropped out of school. I moved home to Kalamazoo for a little while, and I kept myself so busy that I didn't have to think. And for the years that followed, I traveled the country. I moved as far away as I could, and I would work like 70 hours a week. And I didn't make much art because I was afraid of what the art would say. I was afraid of the truth. I was afraid that if I made the art, then I would have to accept the fact of what was happening, and I wasn't really sure I was ready to do that. So I ran from my grief till it started running back. When I was ready to touch it, I decided to go back to school. And in the winter of 2022, I started going to Western Michigan University. And there I was lucky enough to be taught by Bill Davis, who is still a mentor to me. And Bill was someone who, and still does, had pushed me to explore these concepts further and to take my work to a higher level. And he would often show me a lot of other photographers. And one that he showed me was Flor Garduño, which if you know her work, you can see how this is like very inspired by her. Because she used a lot of like portraiture to talk about like ritual and the human form. I'd work a lot in the studio because I loved how controlled the environment was. I could control the lighting, I could control the background, the foreground, I could control the wardrobe, the propping. But I grew really tired of a controlled environment. And so I would, kind of work outside a little bit. I took a lot of self-portraits because I was always available. It's easy to photograph yourself when you're, your own schedule. But I also, here's another self-portrait. But I would also use other models as well. But I did kind of step outside of the studio because I was just getting I was getting worn down by such a controlled environment. One more. I'm going to talk about one series that I made called Grief Practice, but first I want to define what grief practice is to me. I think that grief practice is something that soothes your grief, so is like a way to tend to it. An example of this is a good friend of mine is a wrestler, and I grew up in a very wrestling forward household. It's just WWE was on all the time. And after my dad died, I didn't want to touch it. I couldn't think about it, couldn't talk about it, couldn't engage in it. And now I go to the wrestling matches, and they're awesome. And that to me is grief practice. It soothes those feelings. But I also make a lot of work that does a similar thing. So this is grief practice. It's about identity through grief. When I was making this, I saw myself as two versions who were in opposition, the Olivia before and the Olivia now. I felt like grief had split me in half, like I could never become whole again. Grief changes us in really big ways, and I think it made sense for me to see the other Olivia as someone beside myself. I think I was driven by jealousy and a wish for a time that felt safer and simpler. I don't view it this way anymore because I don't think there has to be an opposition. Here's another image from that series. I did work in the studio for this, and I asked my friend Kate to help model and be another version of me because it was important that I found someone who kind of looked like me, but also, hair color and height, but was different enough that you could tell that there was this other person. I kept wardrobe simple and in harmony because I wanted to kind of comment on this opposite spectrum and yet in agreement, a sort of push-pull relationship that I was really interested in. In the spring of 2023, my practice really shifted to what it is now. While at Western, I took an alternative process class with Ginger Owen Murakami, who's another mentor of mine. And in that class, we learned how to make cyanotypes, Van Dyke Brown, and gum bichromate prints. All of these techniques are considered cameraless since you don't technically need a camera to create these images. And then all of the printing methods require UV or sunlight to be printed. So they can be very friendly outside of darkroom settings. This is an example of a cyanotype, and a cyanotype uses a ferric ammonia and potassium ferricyanide, and together these chemicals create a light-sensitive formula that when coated on a substrate, you can they create a transparency and print your images using the UV light. And then I stitched it together, and the stitching will come in later. But yeah, I'd always loved photography and found myself oftentimes gravitating towards the darkroom above all else because I felt so stifled by the rigidness of digital imagery and inkjet printing. But even the darkroom at times had felt too calculated in a way that was hindering the work I was making. So it was really big for me to be introduced to alternative process because mark making is so important to me. These are examples of gum bichromate prints, and I was really drawn to gum bichromate printing pretty quickly because, I don't know, because it's really tedious in nature, and I'll explain sort of more about it. It is one of the oldest forms of photographic printing. It's a 4-color process that involves hand coating a mixture of gum arabic, potassium dichromate, and watercolor, and then exposing your image by color using UV light or sunlight. As you coat and expose more layers, your image becomes clearer, more understood, and yet all it really does is just build upon itself, layer by layer. And gum printing is a very tedious process, but it's also really meditative to me, and that's what I really liked about it, because it took so long and it was so precious, and there was something about just like the repetition of layers that like really soothed my brain. This is, oh, there we go, an offering. And this is an offering was my senior thesis at Western. And this consisted of 18 4-layer gum bichromate prints. And this really felt like such a precious body of work to me because in so many ways it had really defined my practice. I worked on this for about 1.5 years in total, though the last 9 months of the project is really where I did the majority of my printing. I was spending just about every single day in the darkroom, including Christmas Eve, which was a great time to be there. No one's there. It felt like really safe in there. Like I felt so safe in that environment. And because of the nature of gum printing, every print can really vary based on like the colors you used, your exposure times, the temperature of the water. So it was really important for me to pull doubles and even triples at time of all the prints. So in total, I made close to 50 of these prints, though only 18 are in the show. Here's another image from that show. I also built all the frames because I just like a tedious task. I'm going to read part of my thesis statement so that you can understand a little bit about this project. So it says, "These prints act as an offering to my grief, like clothes hanging on a line or the first daffodil after a long winter or swimming at the lake at night. Moments like these can never last. This is what makes them beautiful. Solace is fleeting. A memory becomes an echo of the past, a time from before, when before felt like something tangible. Grief sometimes feels like an object I can hold, and yet its ineffable qualities make it hard to contain. So where do I put the grief? I put it next to the peonies. I braid it into my hair. I swim with it in Lake Michigan. I bury it in the garden. I carry it with me while riding my bike. I bake it into bread. I mend it into my clothes. I set the grief free, and I let it become something else for once." I don't think you have to heal from grief. It's not an open wound, though sometimes it feels like one. I think you just have to tend to it and care for it and hold it in your hands and let it take shape. You just have to let it fill the spaces you never thought about and really let it become something else. Literally the day after I finished my thesis, I started working on this quilt because I can't stop moving my hands. And I had never made a quilt before. I had sewn some things, but never a quilt. But I was very drawn to quilting as storytelling. And so this quilt, it's called "And I Lost Track of Time," is an exploration of the entanglement of memory throughout the passage of time. And I'm exploring this using a variety of imagery, both living and dead, natural objects. So we have like a body, a branch, a dead deer, birds in the sky, the leaves in autumn. Just reminders of what once was and will never be again. I used to be very obsessed with this idea of lost days, which were days that I classified as lost to the ether of depression. Sometimes those days would spread into weeks and months and even years. There are times in my life that I feel are really difficult to remember. Like you can only remember the resurface and the getting out. So to achieve this quilt, I printed cyanotypes onto like a thrifted muslin cotton blend. And then I toned some of the cyanotypes using a sodium carbonate and then to bleach them, which is really scary because your image totally disappears and you just have to hope it comes back. And it's like very like, okay. And then I put them in Dectol, which is a developer, to dye them to that brownish color you see. And then I sewed them together. This is another quilt I made a little bit after that over the summer. This is called A Spring Once Remembered. This was a commission for a friend actually, but he kind of gave me free rein on what to do with it. So I like to write as well. And so this was inspired by this like little poem I wrote. So I'll read it to you so you can understand. It says, "The false memory peers through an open window, a spring once remembered. The smell of lilacs carried by the wind, a daffodil dried up and forgotten on the dashboard, a memory once cherished, now left to rot under your bed. One cherry blossom flutters to the sky, picks up and falls again, and again like a hand proclaiming, wait, I have never claimed to have wanted this. Bound by desire, held together by empty statements, wondering, wishing, hoping that springtime would be better." Here's a little side of it, drying at my old studio in the Park Trades. So then in the fall of 2024, I became a resident here at the Kirk Newman Art School. Some of the classes that I've taken while being a resident have included black and white printing, gum bichromate process, encaustics, screen printing, rug hooking, and color film processing. It was really fun to be able to like take classes that I knew a lot about, but also take classes that I knew nothing about. And even the ones that I like knew a lot about, like still being able to like get someone else's perspective was really nice. So this is one that I had taken in the black and white printing. I'm really into like tearing things up and, it's like I said earlier, I can't just like make a print. I don't know, it's like not enough for me. And around this time, I really started thinking a lot about like mending and our relationship to forgiveness and how we work towards repair. And I'll talk about that in a couple other slides. Here's some gum prints I made. This is different than how I had learned to gum print, so it was really nice to like learn someone else's another technique. Encaustics was something new that I learned. And it really made sense to my brain because it's another technique that uses hot liquid wax that's applied to a surface, and you have to keep kind of building your layers and heating it and heat setting it. And again, like the gum printing, like it just makes sense. Layering makes sense to my brain. I like to keep building up. But yeah, I think over the last year I've become really interested again in this idea of like how we work towards repair, and thinking a lot about like points of rupture and when something has like gone so far that it can never resemble what it once was. So a lot of the work I make right now, I think is a lot of like tearing things up, trying to sew them back together, trying to get them to resemble something again, even though they can't. This is another thing I made. It's 2 encaustic panels. So similar idea of kind of the trying to fit it back together. I like to work on things a lot in tandem. So while I've been working on a lot of like the main project I'm working on, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, I've been printing a lot of these tiny cyanotypes, which are just 2x2 cyanotypes that kind of act as like little fragments of memory. So these all come from like bigger, like 8x10 transparencies, but I just take small sections and print them. And I like being able to sort of select small moments from a larger image that can fit in the palm of my hand. They feel like really precious that way. And then I can give them to people because they're like precious and not precious. But I've printed a lot of these. I have stacks. This is a screen print I made, which is kind of a proof of concept for my the big project I'm working towards. The writing reads, if you can read it, says, "I wrote that letter over and over again. Do you ever miss it? And I remember the first time I saw you on that porch." And the image is a house. It's like a line drawing of a house. And I'm very interested in like the way that memory attaches to space, and kind of like, I don't know, how you feel a little like haunted sometimes by, especially as someone who's like lived here most of my life, like it feels a little haunting to be here sometimes. And not always haunting in a bad way, like not that it's like the ghosts of my past, but like everything is just like rich with memory. Every house, every street corner, every building, every, it's like you live here long enough, you feel like you've seen everything. So finally, this is my final project that I'm working on. I'm making another quilt. Right now it's 4 by 5 feet. And yeah, I took a lot of photos of houses that I either lived in or had some like significance to me. And I tried to assemble them to create one house. Though none of them, I think there's only two images in here where it is the same house, but all of these are like various parts. And I wanted it to like appear like that's the case. Like I wasn't really trying to make it look like, oh yeah, this is a house that you've seen, but maybe that some parts of it like feel like they could be. But it's like, again, I think so much about memory, and so much about like just like like memory feels like it is tangible to me, and it feels like stuck in these places. And it's something I like feel like I'm trying to find again. And so thinking a lot about home and what does home look like, and what does home look like, especially when it changes so constantly. Yeah, so I'm very excited for that. The show will be up in May. Our reception is May 2nd. And I thank you all for coming and listening to me talk.